Hey, Jennifer.
Hey, Monica.
So, Jen, today I'm very excited to share our conversation with Megan Leatherman. She is the founder of A Wild New Work, a career development agency with a bit of a twist. In addition to helping her clients discover their passions and build more enriching professional life, Megan's work focuses on reconnecting people with nature, which you know we love, working with the seasons, and learning to tune in to our innate inner knowledge.
Yes, and Megan is a former HR professional with a master's degree in conflict and dispute resolution from the University of Oregon School of Law. In addition to her coaching work, she's also a podcaster, writer, speaker, and this is a fun one, also a tarot card reader.
I know, I love that. So,
Me too.
we really enjoyed catching up with Megan to talk about how we can rewild the workplace and rewild ourselves. And if you listen, you'll learn a little bit about what that is.
Yes. And in this episode, we chat about the fundamental problem with work culture today, how we got here, how we can cultivate a meaningful adulthood in a world dominated by capitalism and social media.
So, let's get to our conversation with Megan Leatherman. Welcome to Biophilic Solutions. Hey, Jen.
Hi, Monica. Hi, Megan. We're so thrilled to have you as we're already laughing as we start.
Oh my God. Jen and I had this, we were here in Serenbe last week for the Biophilic Leadership Summit, and it was just like a whirlwind. And then I know she was traveling and I was traveling. So now we're back in the office and we're so excited to have you.
Well, thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
You know, one of the things I love to just dive right in and have you lay out the problem, the sort of premise of your work is what is wrong with how we work today.
Yeah, well, I think the most honest way to start is to say that the fact of work itself is the problem. So the fact that we have to work for a wage in this economy and this structure is unnatural. There's no other species that I have found that labors all day to earn a coin or a piece of paper and then uses that intermediary to then pay for the things they need to survive. It's
Mhm.
just it's really unnatural. All beings have to labor to sustain themselves, find food, make shelter, and our ancestors all did that. But with the advent of civilization and capitalism, now we labor for this intermediary resource that has no actual value in and of itself. And then, we're supposed to enjoy that. Or, what's wrong if you don't want to work? Like, you're so entitled if you don't want to work for a wage. But the truth is that we're forced to. It's not a choice. We might have choices inside of it, what kind of work and for whom and where. But bottom line, most of us cannot afford not to work. So then if at its foundational level, it's wrong, then of course, the way it's going to manifest or look is also rotten. And I was in human resources before I started working for myself. And I'm still 10 or 12 years later, just astounded by the amount of resources and energy and time that gets put into trying to convince people that this is all great. And don't you want to work for this company? And sure, you might want to enjoy your time on your weekends, but it's like this big farce that we're all kind of playing along with. And so, of course, how we work in offices and departed from nature and the seasonal cycles and this hyper productivity all year long and the hierarchy of the organization or whatever it is, of course, that's going to be problematic because the fact is we're not meant to be living this way or sustaining ourselves in this way.
So true. I mean, when I started studying you and your work and everything that you do, it's just, it was like this aha moment of like, of course. And I'm also fascinated to think of like what you've seen since COVID, because I feel like COVID was like that door, that entryway of everything that you teach and talk about, because wow, we had this first time in our lives that we're able to actually step away from working as much as we did because we couldn't. So, and then now we're shoved home and now everything's kind of up in the air with the climate of work and everything. But I'm just curious to see if you've actually seen a huge uptick of interest because of COVID.
Yeah, I do feel like the veil more and more got sort of taken away, or people could see, the joke for what it was, kind of like, we have these quote unquote essential workers, but we're going to put them in the workplace without any protections or support, but they're just kind of thrown in there and thrown into the grindstone and sacrificed so that we can, have food stocked at the grocery store, or, let's be flexible and everyone can work from home. And now that's getting rolled back without any like real legitimate reasons for a lot of people. So I feel like more and more people are realizing that this is just kind of a silly way to organize ourselves and live, and people got a taste for it. And I wish that I feel like we've kind of like we got sort of farther in COVID and then kind of got roped back. I guess
Yes.
that's how change happens. It's like two steps forward, one step back. But I do feel like more and more people are realizing the toll that the way we work is taking on us, and the just ridiculousness of continuing to work in jobs or sectors that aren't deeply meaningful to us as the climate is changing and there's wildfires and there's one crisis after another, but we're still kind of expected to keep going along, with life as usual. So I do think the cognitive dissonance is kind of increasing, which I think is a good thing.
So, Megan, how did we get here? Like, how did sort of this structure, work for a wage, happen? I mean, there is a clear historical, there's a story here, and so I'd love you to share that with us.
Yeah, well, where I like to start when I talk about it is that, there was the advent of capitalism about 500 years ago, which I'll talk about. But to me, that doesn't really make as much sense if we don't understand where civilization comes from, because capitalism only grew out of civilization. Humans' relationships to the land were already tenuous by the time capitalism emerged. So
Mhm.
one broad stroke story could be that, around 10 to 15,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, there starts to be evidence of humans shifting from a hunter gatherer way of living to agriculture, and sort of this, what became a sort of domination over nature kind of way of subsisting. So plant a field and you start to have an abundance of calories, and the group of people starts to settle. So now we're no longer moving around the ecosystem, but we're farming. And then that can kind of grow into like controlling the landscape to give it what you need. There are other instances of farming, like in South America or in North America, where indigenous peoples were cultivating the land for food, but it didn't become this domination over. It was sort of like a food forest versus like plowed
Mhm.
land.
Mhm.
So civilization begins to arise, possibly as a result of humans shifting to agriculture. And with that comes, we start to see less egalitarianism and more hierarchy. So who gets to keep track of the excess food and who decides where it goes to? And then, oh, we have to protect it from this group of people who wants more. And so there begins to be this story of human evolution unfolding that becomes like the civilizations that we know now, Mesopotamia, the Romans, that are, patriarchal, and there is war and conflict. So where capitalism comes from is that, in Europe, in the feudal era, around Rome has collapsed. So the Roman Empire was sort of ruling over this area, but has stepped away, fallen away. And so now there's this like vacuum of, how do people organize? And what arises is feudalism, that there will be peasants working on the land and there's a lord. And, the peasants, we think of this time as like really, really bad. But actually, there were some really essential safeguards for peasants that we don't even have today. They had access to common lands where they could go forage and collect firewood, or even, let a cow graze. They lived in community. These were
Mhm.
tight knit communities. They did not work as much as we did. And I'm not saying I want to go back to the feudal era, but they had a ton of holidays because of the
Mhm.
Catholic Church's schedule. They worked seasonally with the land. So capitalism loves to tell this story that like, oh, thank God capitalism came. Now I don't have to like farm a plot of land. I can just sit for 8 hours at a computer. Like it's supposed to be our savior, but it's not. So feudalism arises. And with that, more and more peasants and the people were beginning to fight back against what they felt like were these, really legitimate inequalities with the
Mhm.
nobility and all of that. And I'm pulling from a book that I'm sure we'll talk about called Caliban and the Witch by Sylvia Federici. And I teach
Yeah.
from that book this class called Composting Capitalism. So that's kind of my main text that I'm pulling from. And so Federici talks about how there was this window when the people were really rising up and the Black Plague had swept across
Mhm.
Europe. Like 30% or more of the workforce is dead. Now people are getting paid a lot, to work a piece of land. Workers had a lot of rights and freedoms. And there was this opening in history where things could have sort of gone a different way, where people could have had a lot more equality. Maybe we could have gotten to a place where there was more freedom and liberty. But instead, the nobility and those in power sort of consolidate power, and the backlash is what we know now as capitalism.
Mhm.
So they enclosed the common lands. So now the peasants don't have a place where they can forage or collect firewood. Women and people who weren't white were totally degraded and put into other classes so that their labor could be subjugated. The wage begins to be invented. So now, you can't farm that barley and just use it for your family. Now you need to be in this barley mill and working in the mill, and someone will give you a coin, and then you can go buy what you need to make food. And that was a forced, violent thing. People would go to the gallows if they weren't willing to, be housed and take a job. So capitalism has been violent since its inception, and it continues to be violent today. So hundreds of years later, here we are. Now we kind of just think it's like the way things are. And isn't this
Mhm.
nice? And you could just, make money and be comfortable. But the truth is that we're still forced into it. And even those of us who are maybe really comfortable in it, like, I get to work from my home and it is pretty comfortable. That's only possible because someone else's labor across the globe is being extracted from them in really dire circumstances to make it cheap for me to live and do this work. So it's not like it's all one way for all of us.
Mhm.
So I guess that's what I would say about how we kind of arrived here.
Yeah, and one of the, things that you mentioned listening to Douglas Rushkoff's, episode, which we did last week, is the concept of the commons and the concept of the marketplace. And when the marketplace ended up being taken over by the nobles and the lords, and, the king was deemed by, whatever, I don't know if it was religion or the monarchy came first, but they came together and said, these are the people who are in charge. They then created money, right? Rather than trade, or a cooperative, it became, to your point, you're not actually making the thing, you're a cog in the wheel, in the mill. So I just think it's really interesting. And history is so important, because if we understand history, we can understand today, and we might understand where we are for the future. Talk a little bit about Sylvia, and the impact on your work. And how did you, so you were in HR, but like, how did you come into that and sort of start to rethink how this was going to actually, I don't even know if we want to use the word work anymore, but like, the project that you're playing with, how did it all come together? And tell me a little bit more about that book and how that influenced you.
Yeah, well, after I left my sort of formal HR job, I stayed on as a contractor for a couple years and just kind of I kind of fell into self-employment. And then once you're there, it's kind of hard to go back because it's
Mhm.
lovely in some ways. And so, as part of working for myself, I just began kind of writing and thinking more about the workplace and what I was doing for or with employees or to employees. And
Mhm.
one of the things that has always felt really true and essential to me is the natural world and my connection to it. And I started just getting curious about how nature works, quote unquote, and how we're working and how
Mhm.
different they feel and seem. And so I just started writing and thinking more about that. And then probably about 7 years ago, I read Sylvia's most popular book, probably Caliban and the Witch, which is what I teach from. And it really, one, I think just validated what I was feeling, this like disenchantment with work and your career and that whole sort of part of our world or culture. But it also helped me see that my disenchantment or what I was feeling was part of a much larger story,
Mhm.
that all across the globe we're actually in solidarity with people who are are also forced to work, who don't have a choice. And we have different access points or privileges inside of this, but it helped me to see my experience as like part of a much larger web than just me feeling like I didn't really know what to do next. And why is this hard? Like, I love what I do. I wouldn't change anything about it. But if I really had choice, if I didn't need money, I
Mhm.
don't think I'd be doing as much of it as what I'm
Mhm.
doing, and there wouldn't be the
Right.
stress of trying to make money from it. So I felt like I had come to the end, like, wow, I've created something I really love. And some days I still don't want to do it. And
Mhm.
why? What, like, what's wrong with me? But learning about capitalism has helped me understand that it's because I don't actually have as much freedom as human beings and all beings really deserve.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm sure it must have been, I'm assuming, maybe you can kind of dive into like learning about this and then learning about yourself and all of us in the space of civilization and capitalism and how heavy that is. Like what a weight we all carry with us every day, that we're not living to our real potential as humans because we carry that weight of, oh my gosh, I have to do all these jobs to make sure I can just survive, just so I can put a roof over my head, so I can have my food. And we're not looking for millions of dollars, most of us. We just want to live, and there's a heaviness to it. So maybe you could just talk to like your discovery of like what people carry with them every day, or what you're learning from people of how do we, and maybe it's multi-layered question because I'm so curious about everything that you do, is like how do we get through this? How do we look at it in the lens of like, oh, okay, this is something interesting, but how do I then be as human as possible in the cyclical nature as well of like seasonality? Like how do we carry all this with us as we move forward? That's a heavy question, maybe too many questions at once. I don't I have a lot of questions.
I'm with you. Yeah. Yes, it is. So it causes a lot of grief.
Mhm.
And it's not really grief that's created by realizing it. It's just, like you said, the grief we've all carried in this, knowing it maybe even before we could name it. And I find a lot of people just feel relief in being honest about it, just saying, this is real. You're not weird if this feels heavy. The places where I find the most agency and relief or power inside of this are, one, remembering that we all have ancestors who lived before civilization, through civilization, before capitalism, and through capitalism. So in our heritage, we all have people who knew how to live intimately with the earth, who did work hard, but it was joyful and it was communal. And so that wisdom lives on in us. We know how to do that. And, I believe if people want to, they can still work with their wise and well ancestors to receive help, to know how to navigate these really challenging times. I
Mhm.
think things are getting so tenuous that we need way more support than we're used to receiving. And for me, the land and my ancestors are kind of my main sources of material, meaningful support because I don't think I can navigate this myself. So the ancestors, an intimate connection to the land, talking to the land about how this is, I want to be with you. I want to spend more time with you, but I have to do these jobs and it's hard. Like what can you teach me about how to be with this heaviness right now? And
Mhm.
maybe a special bird comes along or a deer crosses your path. And that's a way that the land can, affirm how you're feeling or give you signs. So I'd say the land and the ancestors are my two main primary sources of support. And then each of us is, I think, having to make more and more choices about our comfort and convenience and our values, and those are
Mhm.
really real choices, and it's different for everyone. But the truth is, I think if we're going to navigate this well, it is going to mean less comfort and convenience overall.
Well, and that's an interesting point, and kinda takes me back to where I almost wanna, like, and you can either, maybe I wanna hear both, um, start with sort of COVID or think back 500 years ago in that sort of feudal timescape. You know, what was the opportunity, right? Like, what was the opportunity, way back when? Like, what would have been a good model? And or through COVID, we all recognized how much nature and the connection to the land and being outdoors and the changing, seeing the birds and the changing of the seasons, and really reckon, oh my God, look what's blooming, because we've slowed down and we stopped, right? or we had the time to do that, whether that was spending time with family or just doing a little bit less work or doing it a little bit less in a linear fashion of more and more and more. So I guess the question is, what is the opportunity? What's the, I don't want to say ideal, but what's a model that we could think about to look towards? Because I agree with you, we're so used to the convenience, um, and all the things that come with it. And I don't know. I mean, people are complacent.
Mm,
Yeah, this is challenging because it's not an either or, but there is this
Mhm.
thought process that, if we get people into unions and we organize labor and we demand power,
Mhm.
as a large working class, that could really change things. And I believe that.
Mhm.
And, you know, the suffering and disconnection to the land didn't start with capitalism. Again, it started, well, I can't say exactly when it started, but civilization really did a number on
Mhm.
people. And so in my heart, I can't say that I'm really fired up or invested in the idea that we just need to get people into unions and organize labor. I think that's totally valid. It's just
Mhm.
not where my heart is.
Mhm.
Because even if I was getting paid really well or I had really good benefits, my body wants to be by the river in the
Mm.
summer. I don't want to be in a job. I don't believe jobs are for humans. So my ideal, however, utopian it might seem, is that really what I see is like the village of the future where we are sustaining ourselves without money and our days are spent, like our ancestors. And I don't know what it looks like, pulling what we have now forward. I know we can't just go back.
Mhm.
But I could envision, cultivating food, making food, each of us sort of using our own gifts and giving to a small community of people in the ways that are aligned for us, living really lightly on the land or with the land or moving seasonally, ways that indigenous peoples have done for millennia and
Mhm.
that are legitimately sustainable. So I have no idea how we get from there to here, but I guess I just want to be honest that there is, I think, a totally legitimate argument for
Mhm.
organized labor and, socialism and communism even. But for me, if it doesn't include like becoming an animal again, like living on the land, I just don't know if it would stick or it's not the future I desire.
when you speak to this, when you talk to students or wherever you might be talking to a group, are people kind of nodding their head saying, "Yeah, yeah, I feel that. I feel that." Like, I'm curious to see the kind of response you get when you talk to people about all this.
I mean, I could be in an echo chamber, but yeah, I do feel like people are resonating with it more and more. Yeah, I just think the sort of veils are falling slowly but surely. We're all still complacent, like Monica said, and totally enmeshed in this system. And I don't think we'll see this in my lifetime, but who knows? I mean, I just think things are getting so chaotic and wild. It could be that we have to create villages, and I don't know what that will look like, but it could be a really beautiful thing.
I think that the centering of the cultivating community or a village, there has been a lot of talk lately of, local and, your local sphere of influence, you know, it could be 5 people. Even Jen was saying the other day that, there's sort of these anti-influencers, right? Digital media created the influencer, right? Where a person, not just advertising created a product as a brand, right? That I'm going to tell you how fabulous this brand is and how sad you're going to be if you don't own it. So I'm going to, right, that is part of, this industrialization, that sort of advertising layered on top of that. But then the digital media, social media, internet layered on top of that to create you as a brand and for all of us to feel bad if we don't have a million followers and that we all need to be a Kardashian or something, which has like it's like the least thing I ever would want to be. And I think the more and more and more, and we talked about this with Douglas of like, we used to think in circles and now we're thinking in lines, and this is a problem. And I think it goes back to nature and seasonality. So, in your work, I know you're doing retreats. I know you have a podcast. Where are you taking people to sort of find the wild new work, which is the name of the podcast? Like, tell us a little bit about sort of like how you're cultivating at minimum communities to have these conversations.
Yes. I think of a wild new work as the work that, like capital W work that we need to do right now.
Mhm,
And that's
mhm,
adult work. And
mhm,
a lot of us not being born into initiation cultures or cultures with rites of passage never really got a chance to meaningfully and very clearly step into adulthood
mm,
where I am now, like the mother tree in the forest where I'm strong enough that I can provide shelter and resources for others. So I see some of my work as inviting people into meaningful adulthood. Some of that I do through a collaboration called Rise Up Rooted. Some of it is what we cover on the podcast or in the newsletter. What does it mean to step into that adult work right now? And it looks like living in alignment with the seasons, being with the land, getting more and more used to or divesting from this comfort and convenience and all the capitalist cultural baggage that we have.
mhm,
When capitalism was invented, people had to be threatened with jail or the gallows to get into the job. But now it's become so indoctrinated that we just do it like kind of asleep or willingly. So some of it is sort of undoing like all of that damage and remembering what
mhm,
it's like to relate to each other, not as resources, but as, sovereign beings in and of themselves and relate to the land that way. So, yeah, I hope it's, inspiration and education and getting people out, sitting on the ground. Like if I do anything else, just getting people laying on the earth and just listening, that's sort of a job well done to me. And I hope to grow into offering more like, specific rites of passage for people because that's been such a powerful experience on my own journey. And I think more and more, we just need more and more adults who are willing to do this big work.
mhm,
Are your retreats anywhere specific, or do they change all the time where they're hosted?
I've done a few in different areas, but yeah, there's like two primary places of land here in Oregon, Sauvie Island, and a place called Oxbow on the Sandy River
mm,
that I've cultivated a long relationship with. And the land is definitely a partner in those experiences. I don't do much. The land is really the facilitator. So I teach people how to kind of communicate with the land and read the land. I believe that everything on the land is alive and animated, and that we are constantly sent signs and invitations from the land and our ancestors. And it doesn't take much to learn how to read those and just see yourself as part of this much larger web of support than you realized.
mhm,
I love that you just said that, Megan. Just like it's the noticing, right? It's the noticing of the land, noticing like, because I always try and talk to people about why are we spending so much time on social media looking at everyone else's life and we're not even studying our own ancestors? Like that to me is mind blowing because I think we've lost touch with who we are as human beings because we are in that cycle of capitalism and of having to work to buy the things that we need, all the things to make us comfortable because we're supposed to be comfortable. It gets so much more compounded. But I think it's so important what you're saying and teaching and working with is like that. Oh, I forgot about that. It's you're knocking people on the head a little bit saying, don't forget when we learn about where we came from, we're so much more
mhm,
equipped to know who we are in our own bodies, in our own families, saying, oh, I'm attracted to this land or this place or this scent because of where we came from. So it's that kind of quiet noticing and slowing down. But I love that you're doing this because it's just like that little invitation of acknowledgement of, oh, you're right. That's probably better for me. That's
mhm,
that's what I should be focusing on versus how many likes do I have today? Or
mhm,
it's so fake and it's just so it's painful. It's painful to watch society kind of go down that spiral of where we're going instead of being like this fulfilled human in a space that embraces us in nature.
mhm. Yeah, and the culture is changing in so many ways right now.
Yeah.
Some that maybe is imperceptible. I think about New York City when they take like social media. We have not had forever. Cars we have not had forever. And so I think of, these cities that are taking back the streets from the cars, right? So I do think things are changing, but I think that reminding ourselves that we are nature, and that the ancient instinctual inside of ourselves, which you say, and I do think the more that studies or research on consciousness, and is DNA, how is that the DNA is passed down, is the consciousness passed down, and it is inside of us, but we've been wound up
Mhm.
and sort of told not to look there anymore. Don't no 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 no. If we can just share the knowledge, then maybe that seed is planted somewhere else. I like that idea of being the mother tree and sort of trying to provide seeds and shelter and nourishment for others. Where do you see your work going from here?
Yeah, well, the way the world has been, I feel like I only get clarity like a couple months at a time in terms of planning. Like I don't do nearly as much planning anymore because I just don't know. It's kind of season to season for me.
Mhm.
But what I hope I'm growing into and where I put my intention is, one, again, studying rites of passage and doing that work as I can, and hopefully, growing into an adult who could hold that space for others and
Mhm.
for young people so that they don't have to wait till they're, as old as me to understand why they're here and the medicine that they bring. It is about deepening my relationship to the land here.
Mhm.
And perhaps one day that will mean living on land. Right now, I live in a city. I don't know what that could look like, but I'm taking it very slow and just trying to nurture that relationship. And yeah, just continuing to ask for what wants to come through me and how to use my gifts well. And I believe I'll keep teaching and being out on the land and studying initiation rites and growing into that. So yeah, that's kind of what feels the most ripe and alive for me right now.
And without a like, because it's like and even I'm like wanting like an answer, like give me a model, like what are we supposed to change, how do we change it, right? Like even that, probably that, the thought of just sort of even being okay in the in between, right? Being comfortable in that discomfort, that we know we need change. We know there can be a spaciousness to have more autonomy. And so, whether that's looking for a new role or finding different meaning in your role, you always, when you find people who are really passionate about what they do and they're excited about their work, you're like, wow, that's so rare. And so, I guess it's like really growing the concept that you can, find this in between as the world shifts under,
Yeah, I know. I wish I could give you the model and the blueprint.
right?
I mean, I think nature is the blueprint. I see how, other beings are living, and it's very interconnected and
Mhm.
chaotic, and it doesn't always make sense, and it's always changing. And so, yeah, I think I'm trying to embody that more. But for people who are really feeling the grind right now,
Mhm.
and like, what do I do? Most of the people I work with are like, I don't like where I'm at, but I have no idea what I would do instead. And that's a
Yeah.
really tricky place, but also really ripe with possibility. So it is kind of relearning how to, know yourself well enough to know what it means for you to feel alive and vitality. Like capitalist culture is totally deadening, like our whole, the wide range of experiences and emotions that the human
Mhm.
body can have are very limited and muted inside of
Mhm.
capitalist culture because you're supposed to be professional and you do these things. And, it's just kind of a dead place.
Yeah.
So if we can remember and connect to what that kernel of aliveness feels like, which can include grief and pain and loss and yearning, it's not like a manic all up kind of thing. But if we can follow those threads of like aliveness, like this
Mhm.
person, I feel alive in this person's presence. I feel alive here. This feels alive. It's growing. It's a living thing.
Mhm.
Mhm.
That's like a GPS that we can use in
Yeah.
this really wild time. And then, yeah, just accessing the sources of support that you believe in. A lot of my work is kind of spiritual because I just don't believe that we're here for no reason or that none of this really matters. I believe each of us who are born right now came here for a reason. There's a reason that you're living in this collapse and you have important gifts to share
Mhm.
in it, that we need you. Like every person is like the little dandelion that fills this important ecological niche. So we're all needed. So yeah, I think, looking for those kernels of aliveness and remembering that you are here for a reason, and remembering that nothing is meant to stay the same forever and won't stay the same. So,
Mhm.
a lot of times we go through these like wintry periods in our creative or vocational lives where it's like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing.
Mhm.
I know it's not that, but what is it? And that's a hard place to be. But just like you would in the winter, you can cultivate warmth and activity. You can sit in the quiet. You could just sleep more, ask for dreams. Like you can literally embody the seasons in your vocational life too, so that you don't feel like you're just frozen in place, but you can, it might just be a normal integrative quiet time and spring will come.
Oh my gosh. Yes. 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 My head was exploding when you were saying all that because
Yeah.
you're right. Exactly. I mean, because again, that hustle culture that we're taught that we're supposed to be in continuously. And in the winter, the wintering that, what's her name? Something May, who I have the book over here somewhere.
The sister seasons.
Not that one. It's
Oh.
another book called Wintering.
Yeah,
Oh,
Catherine May.
Yes.
Catherine Met. Yeah.
And I love that because you're right, Megan. It's like we have to remember that every season is different and they're there for a reason for us to then do that slow down, to be quiet, be in that still, to listen to what the world is, what our bodies are saying in the world. And then for spring to then be that time of evolution and rebirth and newness and restoration. And it's just, we have to be quiet enough and still enough to listen to our bodies during those times. And you're right, because we don't give ourselves permission, but you are in your work, in your education. It's just like, this is what we need this so badly right now, Megan.
Yeah, I mean, and it is, it's like you're the example, which is
Yeah.
great, and sometimes that's what we need. Well, we need and again, that doesn't mean you have to be a perfect example, but it's like, there may not be what's the perfect
Mm.
utopian workplace or non-workplace, but we can at least go become centered and spend time with ourselves and really think about what makes us alive, so I appreciate that. Have we not covered is there anything we haven't covered that you wanna share? Or we'll put all how to find you in the show notes.
No, I think we covered a lot of ground. Yeah, I really appreciate your questions and reflections. And yeah, thanks for being in the I don't know with me and just kind of letting the soup bubble. That's
Yeah,
all we can do right now.
it really is, and I think uncertainty is very difficult for us, but, we're in it. So,
Yeah.
as we recorded in the early April.
Mhm.
We are in it.
Yeah.
And so thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your questions and thoughts. I really appreciated this time.
Jen, that conversation was so fascinating. And I'll be honest, it challenged me in some ways. Work and hustling and earning money, it's always been so highly valued in our culture for such a long time that it's hard to completely untangle, myself or any of us from that mindset. But I also think for the sake of the planet and for our own well being, we need to start thinking about untangling it. For me, that feels especially true when we're talking about rampant overconsumption and greed. And as we're seeing, these things do go hand in hand with a kind of growth at all costs economic system.
Oh my God, isn't that the truth? I think you're absolutely right. I found it really interesting hearing Megan talk about her work, helping people find more fulfilling careers while also being upfront about doing that within a system she sees as a fundamentally flawed system. And honestly, it was kind of refreshing to hear someone so candid really talk about that fact that even though she finds meaning in what she does, she doesn't want to be doing it constantly. That kind of honesty is rare and really, really relatable.
Yeah, no, I really found that refreshing as well. And I think both of us are in the same boat, right? I mean, I think the vast majority of people are. Attitudes.
I also think attitudes around work are really shifting due to a whole host of reasons. And to Megan's point, it's not because people are lazy at all. It's because for so many people, there's a huge disconnect between their work and any sort of deeper meaning. I mean, over time, it just becomes hard to rectify.
Yeah, and I think as we move forward, we really need to take stock of what is working in our current system and what's not. And we can debate whether or not a quote unquote utopian future where we're back to living on the land is possible. But there are some fundamental truths in Megan's vision. I think really the idea of living lighter on the land, living in community, tapping into this innate knowledge that we all have, and of course, reconnecting with nature. These things are so important and really, really resonate with me. What about you, Jen?
Well, of course. And yes, I absolutely agree. All of what you just said. I was also really compelled by our conversation about initiation rites and how they create meaning for people. I think she has a lot of really interesting ideas about how we can reconnect to nature and to community that aren't necessarily things I've thought about before and aren't just work related at all.
Yeah, and I wonder if we had more access points where we derive meaning, would that shift our relationship with work?
Actually, that's a really great question.
Yes, and food for thought. So, we have tons of links in our show notes for anyone who wants to learn more. And we've linked Megan's podcast and her website, as well as a book by Sylvia Federici, Caliban and the Witch. So, definitely check those out.
All right. Talk soon, Monica.
Bye, Jennifer.